on the day that his forces have retaken the old city. Now, rebels have withdrawn from an area around the ancient citadel, which they have held for the past 4 years. And they're calling for a 5-day truce to allow the evacuation of civilians. There are tens of thousands of people that are still trapped in the last of the rebel-held districts of Aleppo. The US and 5 other Western powers have also put out a joint statement appealing for an immediate ceasefire. Now, the Syrian government, they have now recaptured more than 75% of the country's second city, that is Aleppo, from rebel forces. If we move instead into Aleppo, you'll see on Tuesday they reclaimed a part of the district of Al-Shar. Now, that is just about 2 kilometres from the citadel. The citadel is the centre of the old city. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, was part of a small group of journalists that was taken there by the Syrian army.
These past few weeks have seen a stunning advance by the Syrian military and its allies. Today, the army has taken us here to Shar, the area they recaptured yesterday. And you can see what heavy fighting there's been here. You can still smell the explosives. By recapturing this area, they were able to move towards the ancient citadel. And in doing so, they split the rebel forces and then quickly seized the historic old city of Aleppo. It's a huge victory by President Assad's forces, but the battle isn't over yet. The remaining rebel fighters have retreated to what's left of their rebel enclave, including the battle-hardened fighters of the group known as the Nusra Front, linked to Al-Qaeda. Some of the toughest battles in this war for Aleppo are about to begin. And so concern is mounting for the tens of thousands of civilians trapped there. Hundreds of families are already fleeing into government-controlled West Aleppo. The others are trying to make it to rebel areas which are not on the current front lines. There is a sense that the battle for this strategic city is about to end. And that would be the biggest victory for President Assad's forces since this uprising began nearly 6 years ago.
BBC's Lise Doucet there. Let's turn to Pakistan. A passenger plane has crashed in the north of the country, killing everyone on board. 48 people were travelling on the Pakistan International Airlines flight, and the army says 36 bodies have been recovered so far from the crash site. Most of the bodies were burned beyond recognition. There are hundreds of emergency workers that have been deployed in the search, and Sikander Kermani brings us this report.
Amateur video captures the moments after flight PK661 crashed into the slope of a mountain in northern Pakistan. Doctors and soldiers are on the scene, but it's believed none of the passengers survived. At Islamabad airport, where the plane was due to land, relatives gathered, including this man whose cousin was on board.
He was an electrical engineer. He was employed in a project by the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government. 6 months ago, he started the job. He was coming back for a holiday.
The plane took off from the northern city of Chitral around 3 p.m. local time. It came down around 20 miles away from its destination, the capital Islamabad. Bodies of the victims have been taken to the local hospital in Abbottabad, around 12 miles away from the crash site. 3 foreigners are believed to have been amongst the more than 40 passengers. Also on board was this popular, if at times controversial preacher, Junaid Jamshed. He had previously been one of Pakistan's most famous pop stars before turning to religion. Fans have been paying tribute to him.
He was a very good man. He was a national treasure. I'm really sad about his death and that of his family.
The country has suffered a number of major air disasters in the past, and the Prime Minister has expressed his deep grief and sorrow. Aviation authorities have said the plane was suffering from engine problems, but that it's still too early to determine the cause. Sikander Kermani, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at some of the other day's news. There have been long queues in Ghana as people vote in the presidential elections. Veteran opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo is taking on the current president, John Mahama, and the faltering economy and corruption have dominated the campaign. Prosecutors have called on judges to impose a sentence of life imprisonment at the trial of the former Bosnian Serb commander Ratko Mladic. They say it would be irresponsible and an affront to justice to impose anything else. Mladic faces 2 counts of genocide and 9 of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Time magazine has named the US President-elect Donald Trump as its Person of the Year. Mr. Trump said it was a great honour. He beat off contenders including Nigel Farage, Olympic gymnast Simone Biles, and even his former rival in the presidential election, Hillary Clinton. Rescue workers are continuing to search for survivors after an earthquake in Indonesia, which has killed more than 100 people. The 6.5 magnitude quake in the northern province of Aceh has damaged hundreds of buildings. And it has also brought back terrifying memories of the earthquake and tsunami that devastated the region 12 years ago. Daniel Bircher brings us this report.
Desperate attempts to find more survivors, rescue crews are still sifting through the rubble. Many of those who were killed and injured in this earthquake were crushed by collapsing buildings. Where there are no mechanical diggers, they are working by hand. More than 1,000 soldiers and almost as many police have been sent to the worst affected areas. There are now fears that even weak aftershocks could bring more buildings down, so residents are staying out in the open or trying to find temporary shelter. A spokesman for the National Disaster Management Agency said they expected the number of casualties to continue to rise and that a state of emergency had been declared in the province. The quake hit Indonesia's Aceh province, which lies in the north of Sumatra Island. It struck as many were preparing for morning prayers. A number of mosques have collapsed, as have hundreds of shops and houses. In some areas there is no electricity and basic supplies are already running short. The Indonesian Red Cross has sent emergency response teams, as well as water trucks and aid like tarpaulins and blankets. The General Hospital in PD Jaya was quickly overwhelmed, and many people are now being treated in tents that have been pitched on its grounds. This man was with his wife, who was injured in the quake. They have no news of their children, who were staying at a boarding school. The region is prone to earthquakes, and Aceh province was one of those worst hit in the tsunami that struck in 2004, killing more than 170,000 people in Indonesia alone. Memories of that sent many looking for higher ground, but authorities now say there is no risk of a tsunami following this quake. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Let's turn to Italy now. We knew it was coming. Now it's official. Matteo Renzi has resigned as Prime Minister. That's after a bruising referendum defeat at the weekend. Voters rejected his plans for constitutional reform. Let's turn to our correspondent James Reynolds, joining me now from Rome. Welcome to the programme, James. So I was just looking at an alert coming in saying he has resigned as Italy's Premier, but the President has asked him to stay on until a new government is in place.
Yeah, that's standard procedure here in Italy. Essentially, he stays on as a caretaker until a new Prime Minister is found. Let me just describe the timetable for you. Mr. Renzi went to the presidential palace, handed in his resignation. That's accepted. He goes back now to the Prime Minister's office as the caretaker. The president then takes the main role in the country. He will begin a round of talks with political leaders on Thursday at about 5 o'clock your time. And then once that round of talks is finished, we don't exactly know when that will be, the president will pick a new prime minister, swear that person in. Matteo Renzi can then finally go home. Just one more key point. Matteo Renzi isn't going far. He remains the leader of Italy's largest party. So he will play a major role, possibly even a king-making role, in picking his own replacement.
So he is still, what shall I say, there's confidence in him as the leader. He has a pretty strong position there. No chance of him being ousted?
Not that we've seen, and I think that's an absolutely crucial point, because it's not like Matteo Renzi is going to step back and look for a reality show or write a memoir or join a university. He wants, it seems, to remain on the front line of politics. And at the moment, he seems very determined to carry on campaigning, possibly even though this might be too soon, possibly even lead his party in elections which have to be held within the next 14 months or so. So he's not going very far. He will play a key role in talks about his successor. There's some speculation that he may even want to be reappointed himself. But the crucial thing to say, this is not a retirement. He remains a player.
And of course, he's also still so young, James. Who are the people who would be vying to become Prime Minister from other parties?
Well, it would largely be from his own party, potentially, because his own party is still the biggest in Parliament. One name is often mentioned, Pier Carlo Padoan, who is the finance minister. He is deliberately a grey academic figure, the kind of person that people look at and say that is a technocrat. And there's also talk that a former prosecutor, the president of the Senate, Pietro Grasso, may be chosen as well. The problem the president may have is in convincing these people to take the job vacancy, because think about it, there's only 14 months left maximum on the term. There is a major political leader, Matteo Renzi, who may overshadow them, and pretty much a lot of parties want new elections. It may be hard to convince a successor to take the job. What's in it for them?
Not the most tantalising job advert. Thanks very much, James Reynolds, speaking to us from Rome. Well, let's turn to the case now for British members of Parliament to be consulted before the triggering of Article 50. That is effectively the starting gun for official negotiations on leaving the European Union. It has finished its penultimate day at the Supreme Court. And the lawyer opposing the government, that's Lord Panicucci, he said Parliament must be involved in the process because leaving the Union would have such a major impact on UK laws. The Lord Advocate of Scotland also said the Scottish Parliament should have its say on Article 50. More now from our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
The legal battle underway here at the Supreme Court is about whether the government can trigger the 2-year process of leaving the EU without getting the green light from Parliament first. The government's lawyers, led by the Attorney General, have argued ministers can make or unmake international treaties using ancient powers called prerogative, and that includes triggering Brexit. But Gina Miller, the lead claimant in the group that won their case at the High Court last month, says only Parliament can take that step. And this morning, her barrister, Lord Panic, continued to make his argument.
To hold a referendum is a very important matter. My submission is, however, it has nothing whatsoever to do with the issue before the court, which is who enjoys the power to notify. Is there a prerogative power once the referendum has taken place?
Lord Panic said the Act of Parliament that made the EU referendum possible did not give the government the explicit power to take Britain out of the EU. But the President of the Supreme Court, Lord Neuberger, wanted to know about the referendum's legal effect.
Then it seems to me there may be some force in the argument that says when Parliament comes to face up to this issue, they say, well, let the British people vote. It's not decisive, of course, because the government has to decide. But one could say it is Parliament ceding the ground so far as its role is concerned to the people, to a referendum. It's done that, and then it's over to the government.
But it's the former is, with respect, self-evident that Parliament is saying that the people are entitled, should be given a voice.
Yes.
Where I would respectfully take issue is the second part of your Lordship's question to me. It doesn't follow, in my submission, that the people having spoken, they are advising the government as opposed to Parliament.
Dominic Chambers QC then argued that only Parliament could take away rights that Parliament had granted.
By triggering Article 50, EU law rights will undoubtedly and inevitably be lost.
The Supreme Court case is being watched closely in Scotland too. Yesterday, the UK government insisted the devolved administrations had no powers over foreign affairs. But this afternoon, the Scottish government's top law officer, the Lord Advocate, argued Parliament needed to vote and Holyrood needed to give its consent before the UK begins its exit from the EU.
Can I make clear that I do not assert that the Scottish Parliament has a veto on the decision to withdraw the United Kingdom from the European Union. That decision is ultimately, I say, for the Queen in Parliament. What I do say is that the question of whether the Scottish Parliament consents or does not consent to the effects of withdrawal with regard to devolved matters is, by virtue of the Legislative Consent Convention, a matter of constitutional significance.
MPs are debating the government's Brexit strategy today, but the Supreme Court case is so important because if the government loses, then ministers will have to get a bill through Parliament. And that will give MPs the chance to force the government to spell out much more clearly what their plan for leaving the European Union will be before they allow Brexit to begin. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Thousands of people in the United States, including servicemen and women, are attending a ceremony in Hawaii to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Nearly 2,500 people died in the aerial bombardment by Japan, which prompted the United States to join the Second World War. James Downing was there and at 103 years of age is now one of the oldest living survivors. He spoke to us about his vivid memories of how that day unfolded.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
My name is James Downing. I'm a retired lieutenant, U.S. Navy. I was aboard the battleship USS West Virginia, which was moored in Pearl Harbor. The first Japanese plane I saw was flying low and slow. When he passed near me, he opened up with his machine guns. But fortunately, he didn't bank the right angle and he dug a trench behind me. So the war became very personal at that point. Oil leaked out of the ships that had been hit. And the fire from the Arizona was so fierce, it set the oil on fire. So sailors who had been blown off the ship went down under. When they came up, they had a thin film of oil, and they burned like human torches. And that was the saddest thing, the hardest thing to see. These guys coming up, catching on fire, and nothing could be done about it. By the time I got aboard, there wasn't anything to do to save the ship. There were bodies lying around me, and it just occurred to me, their parents will never know what happened to them. We had fireproof lanyards and name tags, so I had a fire hose in one hand trying to put out the fires, and with the other I went around memorizing these name tags so I could write to their parents and tell them what happened to their sons. I expected to die any moment for about 30 minutes, and my reaction was, Lord, I'll be with you in a minute. And that went on for about 30 minutes. But I had the greatest peace I've ever had, I think, just anticipating that I was going to be on the other side pretty soon, and it didn't happen.
That's James Downing reflecting on the attack on Pearl Harbor 75 years ago today. Now to cricket. Red cards, regularly used in football to deal with bad tackles, professional fouls, threatening behaviour towards match officials. Well, from next October, cricket, traditionally thought to be the sport of gentlemen, is set to do the same. Umpires will be given the power to eject players from a game for a serious disciplinary breach. And that could be towards the umpire or an opposition player. But will the idea actually work? Let's speak to former South African test bowler and Fanie de Villiers. He also played 83 one-day internationals for his country. Now presents a cricket show in Afrikaans on South African TV. It's good to have you with us. Well, first off, I suppose my question would be, is this really necessary? Has behaviour declined so much?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's extreme cases, more or less, that created this whole issue. I think one needs to try and work out if minor offences has played a big role. Never in my life, I think in hundreds of games I've played, I think was it necessary to send somebody off or to give him a red card. But I'm sure there were a few cases of yellow cards that could have been given. I would have loved to have given a a few red cards and yellow cards to the Shane Warnes and the Dean Joneses and the Merv Hugheses of the world. Not too many to English players. But I think yellow cards are probably going to be used much more.
I know you used to carry a few yellow cards and red cards in your pockets during some of the games, but I think that was more to interact with the crowd a little bit. But let me read you what the former England captain, right, Mike Brearley was saying. He says, we had a survey of umpires because he was at this decision making. He said 40% said they had considered giving up because of the abuse, and anecdotal evidence from league cricket is that behaviour has got a lot worse. What do you think is behind it?
Well, bad decisions is the first thing that I'm going to be saying as an old player and a fast bowler. I think one needs to also justify that most of these guys are helping and supporting a wonderful game out there. And there have been many players that played with me that was quite abusive towards umpires, especially if bad decisions came their way. And not only bowlers, but batsmen too. So if it's only used for that, I will definitely support it. But I think one needs to have a look at the sledging too between players, amongst players towards each other, not just towards umpires. And I can understand the difficulty for umpires to stay in the game, but sledging between players makes it very uncomfortable sometimes.
So sledging, you mean the abuse that goes between players, but this will apply to that too, is my understanding.
It will apply, but the reality is we need to know exactly if it's only going to be minor or if it's going to be extreme cases. And everybody needs a mechanism to work from. The world is about people and processes. This is just one of those that we need to enhance the processes that's available. And if that can make the game fairer, like technology has brought to the game, then hopefully they can use it in the right way.
So threatening an umpire, physically assaulting another player, umpire, official or spectator, any other violence on the field of play. So do you reckon, briefly, will that work?
Yeah, it can work. I've got a television show, as you said earlier, and we reported on an Indian umpire that was killed by a cricket stump when the bowler wasn't happy with the decision. So those extreme cases I've never seen, but that can be used effectively if that's around to be supported on the red card.
Fonny de Villiers, well known to all of our cricket fans, thank you very much. Right, overspending, common problem this time of year at Christmas in the West. So is it time we curbed the desire to splash the cash on presents by not spending at all, perhaps? Well, the BBC World Hacks team asked American blogger Emily Headland to give us her thoughts on how to make Christmas merry again without splashing the cash.
It's nearly Christmas time. Yay! Yeah, I think we all know there's a pretty big problem with Christmas. It's that we just spend way too much money. But I have a solution. This year, I'm gonna do a Buy Nothing Christmas. Nearly a quarter of Britons feel this pressure to spend more than they can afford at Christmas time. And the average American plans to spend $785 on gifts this year. Yikes! There's a really simple solution. Just don't buy presents. So let me break it down for you 3 ways. The first option is what me and my immediate family do, my husband and my 2 boys. We truly have a Buy Nothing Christmas. Christmas is a time to just spend with family and be warm and cozy together. Option number 2 is make something. This is what we do with my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad. We all come to the table and we bring something that we've poured our love into, not something that we poured our money into. Option number 3 is what we do with my husband's family, and it's buy one thing. Some people call this Secret Santa. It's when you put a bunch of names in a hat and everybody draws one name. That is the only gift they have to buy. So have a very merry Buy Nothing Christmas. I know I will. Let me know how it goes.
So you'll decide what you're going to do with your money this Christmas. You can follow me on Twitter at BBC Nuala. I just want to bring you one story that we're seeing is coming in. It is UK lawmakers are going to back a government timetable to trigger the EU, as they call them, divorce talks by the end of March. So that's 461 to 89 voting to back the government's plan with the European Union, and that is the end of March. I was seeing March 20th as a possible date, triggering the controversial Article 50, the starting gun to start that separation of the two. Thanks for watching. That's all from us for now. Goodbye.